The sprawling Blackwood Ranch in rural Montana had been the Peterson family's legacy for 4 generations. But everything changed the day Richard Blackwood III decided that tradition was less valuable than his quarterly profit margins. The billionaire CEO of Blackwood Industries had inherited the 5,000-acre property from his grandfather, along with a herd of prize-winning cattle that included Thunder, a magnificent Black Angus bull worth more dead than alive in Blackwood's cold calculations. 10-year-old Tommy Martinez had been living in the small caretaker's cottage on the ranch with his grandfather, José, who had worked as the head groundskeeper for the Peterson family for over 30 years. When Blackwood bought the property 6 months ago, he had kept José on staff because the old man knew every inch of the land, but he made it clear that sentimentality had no place in his business model. "That bull is costing me $500 a day in feed and veterinary care," Blackwood announced during his monthly inspection of the property, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the barn floor as he gestured dismissively toward Thunder's stall. "The insurance payout for an accidental death would be $150,000, and I could write off the loss as a tax deduction. It's simple economics." Tommy, who had been quietly mucking out stalls nearby, froze when he heard Blackwood's words. Thunder wasn't just any bull to the boy. The gentle giant had become his closest companion during the long, lonely months since his parents had died in a car accident. While other children his age were afraid of the 2,000-pound animal, Tommy had discovered that Thunder was incredibly intelligent and surprisingly affectionate, responding to his voice and even allowing the boy to brush his coat. "Sir," José said carefully, his weathered hands gripping his work hat, "Thunder is healthy and strong. He's got many good years left for breeding. The Peterson family always said he was the finest bull they'd ever raised." Blackwood's cold gray eyes showed no emotion as he consulted his tablet, scrolling through financial projections. "The Peterson family is gone, old man. I'm not in the business of running a petting zoo. I need this ranch to generate profit, not drain my resources on sentimental attachments to livestock." Tommy's heart raced as he continued listening to the conversation while pretending to work. He had learned to be invisible around Blackwood, who treated him like an unwelcome burden that came with his grandfather's employment. But Thunder was different. Thunder was his friend, the only being on the ranch who seemed to understand the grief and loneliness that the boy carried. "I've scheduled the accident for next Friday," Blackwood continued, his voice as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "Make sure the bull is in the far pasture around 2 p.m. My associates will handle the rest, and by Saturday I'll have an insurance claim filed and a tax write-off that will save me more money than that animal could ever earn." José's face went pale, but he nodded silently. At 72 years old, with no other job prospects and a grandson to support, he couldn't afford to lose his position. Tommy understood his grandfather's impossible situation, but he also understood something that the adults didn't. Sometimes being small and overlooked could be an advantage. That evening, as Tommy sat in Thunder's stall sharing his dinner of beans and rice with the massive bull, he made a promise that would change everything. "I won't let him hurt you," Tommy whispered, stroking Thunder's massive head. "I don't know how yet, but I'll figure out a way to stop him." Thunder, as if sensing the boy's distress, gently nuzzled Tommy's shoulder and made a low, rumbling sound that the child had learned meant affection and trust. It was a sound that reminded Tommy that some bonds were stronger than money, and some fights were worth having even when you were just a poor kid with no power against a billionaire. Tommy spent the next 3 days observing Blackwood's routine, listening to his phone conversations, and studying the man's habits with the focused intensity of someone whose best friend's life depended on it. He noticed that Blackwood was obsessed with his public image, constantly checking social media mentions of his company and bragging about his philanthropic donations to anyone who would listen. "He cares more about what people think than what's right," Tommy confided to Thunder on Thursday evening. "But maybe that's how we beat him." As Friday morning dawned, Tommy knew he had less than 6 hours to execute a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Looking into Thunder's trusting brown eyes, he decided it didn't matter which. He was going to save his friend, no matter what it cost him. Have you ever had a moment where you realized that sometimes the smallest person in the room might be the only one brave enough to stand up for what's right? Tommy's plan began at 6 a.m. on Friday morning with a phone call that would set everything in motion. While his grandfather prepared for another day of work, believing that Thunder's fate was sealed, Tommy used the old rotary phone in the cottage to call the offices of Channel 7 News in Billings, Montana. "Hello," Tommy said in his most mature voice. "I have a story about animal cruelty and insurance fraud involving Blackwood Industries. This is happening today, and you need to get here before 2 p.m. if you want to document it." The receptionist initially dismissed the call as a prank, but Tommy had done his homework. He provided specific details about Blackwood's financial situation, the exact insurance policy number he had overheard during a phone conversation, and most importantly, the precise time and location where the accident was planned to occur. "Kid, if this is some kind of joke," the receptionist warned. "Ma'am," Tommy replied with a seriousness that belied his 10 years, "I'm risking everything to make this call. An innocent animal is going to die for money unless someone stops it. Isn't that the kind of story that news stations care about?" By 10 a.m., Tommy had made similar calls to 3 other news stations, the Montana Department of Agriculture and the State Insurance Fraud Investigation Unit. He used different voices and stories for each call, but the core message was the same. Richard Blackwood was planning to murder a prize bull for insurance money, and it was happening at 2 p.m. at the Blackwood Ranch. The next phase of Tommy's plan required him to become completely invisible, which was a skill he had unfortunately mastered during his months of living under Blackwood's cold authority. He positioned himself in the hayloft of the main barn, where he could observe everything happening in the ranch yard while remaining completely hidden. At 11:30 a.m., a van with Mountain State Veterinary Services painted on the side arrived at the ranch. Tommy watched as 2 men in coveralls unloaded equipment that looked medical but felt sinister. These weren't real veterinarians. They were Blackwood's associates, the people who would make Thunder's death look like a tragic accident. Tommy's stomach churned as he watched Blackwood greet the men, his demeanor completely different from his usual corporate formality. "Everything needs to look completely natural," Blackwood instructed. "A sudden heart attack, an allergic reaction to something in his feed. Whatever works. Just make sure there's no trace of human intervention." One of the men, a thin guy with nervous eyes, nodded eagerly. "We've done this before, Mr. Blackwood. The injection will be undetectable within hours, and the symptoms will match a dozen different natural causes. Your insurance company will never question it." Tommy felt sick hearing the casual way these men discussed murder, but he forced himself to stay focused. His plan depended on timing, and everything had to happen exactly right. At 12:45 p.m., just as Tommy had hoped, the first news van arrived at the ranch gates. Channel 7 had decided to investigate the tip they'd received, and reporter Sarah Mitchell was known for her aggressive investigation of corporate corruption. Behind her came a second news truck, then a third. Blackwood, who was in the process of moving Thunder to the far pasture, stopped dead when he saw the media convoy approaching his property. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, pulling out his phone to call his security team. But Tommy's genius wasn't just in alerting the media. It was in what he had told them. Each news station had been given slightly different information, creating a competitive frenzy as they all rushed to break the story first. More importantly, Tommy had specifically mentioned that Blackwood was planning to commit the crime at 2 p.m., which meant the cameras were positioned perfectly to catch him in the act. "Mr. Blackwood," Sarah Mitchell called out as she approached with her camera crew. "We've received reports about planned insurance fraud involving the death of livestock on this property. Would you care to comment?" Blackwood's face went white, then red with fury. "This is private property. You're trespassing." "We're standing on the public access road," Sarah replied smoothly, "and we have credible information that a crime is about to be committed here. Are you denying that you've arranged for the death of a bull named Thunder for insurance purposes?" Tommy watched from his hiding place as Blackwood's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The CEO looked toward the fake veterinarians, who were hastily packing their equipment back into their van, clearly wanting no part of a situation that was now under media scrutiny. "I don't know what you're talking about," Blackwood stammered, but his body language betrayed him. The confident, cold businessman had been replaced by a panicked man whose illegal scheme was falling apart in real time. That's when Tommy made his move. He climbed down from the hayloft and walked calmly toward the group of adults, leading Thunder by a rope halter. The massive bull followed trustingly, seemingly oblivious to the chaos surrounding him. "Excuse me," Tommy said politely to Sarah Mitchell, his young voice cutting through the adult conversations. "Are you here about Thunder? Because I'm the one who called you." Every adult in the vicinity turned to stare at the small boy standing next to the enormous bull, and in that moment, Tommy looked directly into the news camera and said the words that would make him famous. "This man wanted to kill my best friend for money, but Thunder deserves to live just like any other innocent creature." Do you believe that sometimes the most powerful weapon against greed and corruption is simply a child's refusal to accept that wrong is inevitable? The confrontation that followed would be replayed on national television for weeks. But in the moment, Tommy felt surprisingly calm as he stood between Thunder and the adults whose greed had threatened his friend's life. The news cameras captured every second as the small boy faced down a billionaire CEO with nothing but truth and courage. "You're telling me a 10-year-old orchestrated this entire situation?" Blackwood demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You can't seriously believe the word of a child over a respected businessman." Sarah Mitchell, however, was an experienced investigative reporter who recognized a breaking story when she saw one. "Tommy," she said gently, kneeling down to the boy's level while keeping the cameras rolling, "can you tell us exactly what you heard Mr. Blackwood say about Thunder?" Tommy's voice was steady as he recounted the conversation he had overheard, providing specific details about the insurance policy, the planned timing, and even the names of the fake veterinarians. His grandfather José stood nearby, torn between pride in his grandson's courage and terror about their future employment. "The boy is obviously lying," Blackwood protested, but his words rang hollow as one of the fake veterinarians, panicking under the media scrutiny, began loading their suspicious equipment back into their van with obvious haste. If you're amazed by this brave little boy's fight for justice, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Stories like this remind us that heroes come in all sizes. Detective Maria Santos from the Montana State Police had arrived in response to Tommy's anonymous tip about insurance fraud, and she immediately recognized that the situation was far more serious than a simple civil dispute. "Mr. Blackwood," she said formally, "I'm going to need to examine that veterinary equipment and speak with these gentlemen about their business here today." As Detective Santos approached the suspicious van, one of the fake veterinarians made a crucial mistake. In his haste to escape, he dropped a case that burst open, spilling syringes filled with a clear liquid and documents that detailed the planned accident. "Well, well," Detective Santos said, picking up one of the syringes. "This appears to be a lethal dose of potassium chloride, which would indeed cause symptoms resembling a heart attack in large animals. Exactly the kind of thing you'd use if you wanted to commit insurance fraud." Tommy watched as Blackwood's world collapsed in real time. The CEO, who minutes earlier had been planning a murder for profit, now stood speechless as evidence of his crime lay scattered on the ground for news cameras to document. "Tommy," Sarah Mitchell continued her interview, "what made you decide to call the news stations and police?" The boy looked up at Thunder, who was calmly chewing grass, seemingly unbothered by the chaos around him. "Thunder isn't just a number on a spreadsheet," Tommy said with the wisdom of someone who had experienced real loss. "He's a living being who feels happiness and sadness, just like people do. He didn't deserve to die just because some rich man wanted more money." The impact of Tommy's words was immediate and powerful. The news crews captured not just the boy's statement, but also Thunder's gentle interaction with him. The way the massive bull lowered his head so Tommy could scratch behind his ears. The obvious bond between the unlikely friends. "Furthermore," Detective Santos announced as she examined more evidence from the van, "we have documented proof of conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, animal cruelty, and filing false claims. Mr. Blackwood, you're under arrest." As handcuffs were placed on the billionaire CEO, Tommy felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He had saved Thunder's life, but he also knew that his grandfather would almost certainly lose his job, leaving them with nowhere to live and no source of income. But Tommy's genius had one more layer that even he hadn't fully anticipated. The story of the poor boy who outsmarted a greedy billionaire to save his bull friend was exactly the kind of heartwarming news that goes viral in the social media age. Within hours, the video of Tommy's interview was being shared millions of times and the public response was overwhelming. Animal rights organizations, children's advocacy groups, and ordinary people moved by Tommy's courage began calling for justice, not just for Thunder, but for the boy who had risked everything to protect his friend. The Montana governor's office received thousands of calls demanding that Tommy and his grandfather be protected from retaliation. More importantly, several ranch owners who had been following the story reached out with job offers for José and homes for both Tommy and Thunder. The Peterson family's cousins, who had sold the ranch to Blackwood, publicly stated that they regretted the sale and wished they could undo the harm that had been caused. As evening fell on what had started as the worst day of Tommy's life, he sat in Thunder's stall sharing another simple dinner with his friend. The bull, unaware of how close he had come to death, contentedly ate hay while Tommy processed the whirlwind of events that had saved both their lives. "We did it, Thunder," Tommy whispered, stroking the bull's massive head. "We beat him with nothing but the truth." Have you ever witnessed how a single act of courage can inspire thousands of people to stand up for what's right, proving that good truly can triumph over greed? 3 months later, Tommy Martinez stood in the winner's circle at the Montana State Fair, wearing his first new clothes in over a year, and grinning as Thunder was awarded the prize for Best Bull in the livestock competition. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The animal that Richard Blackwood had wanted to kill for insurance money was now being celebrated as one of the finest bulls in the state. The transformation in Tommy's life had been nothing short of miraculous. The Peterson family cousins, moved by the public outcry and their own guilt over selling the ranch to Blackwood, had used a legal technicality to void the sale and reclaim their family property. They had immediately offered José his old job back, along with a substantial raise and a college fund for Tommy that would ensure the boy's educational future. But the real magic had happened in the weeks following Tommy's courageous stand. The video of the 10-year-old boy facing down a billionaire CEO had been viewed over 50 million times, inspiring people around the world with its message about courage, loyalty, and the power of standing up for the innocent. "Tommy," said Jennifer Peterson Walsh, the new owner of the ranch, "I want you to know that Thunder will have a home here for the rest of his natural life. No one will ever threaten him again." The bull, now the unofficial mascot of what the media had dubbed the ranch where a boy saved a bull, had become something of a celebrity himself. Visitors came from across the country to meet Thunder and Tommy, and their story had been featured in children's books, documentaries, and even discussions in Congress about animal welfare laws. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a veterinarian and animal behaviorist who had studied the case, explained to reporters, "What Tommy demonstrated is something we see rarely, a child's ability to recognize the intrinsic value of another living being, regardless of its economic utility. His actions saved not just Thunder's life, but challenged an entire system that treats animals as disposable commodities." Richard Blackwood, meanwhile, had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for insurance fraud, conspiracy, and multiple other charges. His business empire had collapsed under the weight of the scandal, and he had become a cautionary tale about how greed can destroy everything a person has built. The trial had been a media sensation, with Tommy testifying via video link to avoid the trauma of appearing in court. His testimony was simple but devastating. "I just couldn't understand how someone could hurt an innocent animal for money. Thunder never did anything wrong except trust the wrong person." The judge, moved by Tommy's words and the overwhelming evidence of Blackwood's crimes, had given the maximum sentence allowed by law. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Patricia Morrison had said during sentencing, "a 10-year-old child showed more moral courage and integrity than you did in your entire adult life. Perhaps prison will give you time to reflect on what really matters." But the most beautiful part of the story was what had happened to the relationship between Tommy and Thunder. The bull, now living peacefully in the renovated Peterson Ranch, had become not just Tommy's companion, but his teacher. Under the guidance of professional animal trainers who had been inspired by their story, Tommy had learned to work with Thunder in ways that showcased the intelligence and gentleness of the massive animal. They appeared together at schools, teaching children about empathy, courage, and the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Tommy had developed into a confident public speaker, sharing their story with audiences of all ages and inspiring countless other young people to stand up for what they believed in. The most important thing I learned, Tommy told a group of elementary school students during one of their visits, is that size doesn't matter when you're fighting for something right. Thunder weighs 2,000 pounds and Mr. Blackwood had millions of dollars. But the truth was stronger than both of those things. Dr. Maria Santos, the detective who had arrested Blackwood, had stayed in touch with Tommy and often spoke about how the case had affected her own approach to law enforcement. Tommy taught me that sometimes the most important witnesses are the ones that adults overlook, she said. He reminded me that justice isn't about power or money, it's about protecting the innocent. On the first anniversary of Thunder's rescue, the ranch hosted a celebration that drew visitors from around the world. Animal welfare organizations, children's charities, and ordinary families came to honor the boy who had proven that one small voice could change everything. As the sun set over the Montana landscape, Tommy sat in Thunder's pasture, reading a letter from one of the thousands of children who had written to him after hearing their story. "Dear Tommy," the letter read, "you showed me that even kids can be heroes. Yesterday, I stood up to a bully at school because I remembered what you did for Thunder." Thunder, now contentedly grazing nearby, occasionally looked up at his young friend with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand exactly how much their friendship had meant to both of them. The bull who had been saved by a poor boy's courage had, in return, given that boy a purpose and a platform to inspire others. "You know what, Thunder?" Tommy said, folding the letter carefully. "Mr. Blackwood thought he was so smart with all his money and plans. But he forgot something important. When you try to hurt someone innocent, there's always someone watching who cares enough to stop you. Do you believe that every act of courage, no matter how small it seems at the time, has the power to inspire others and create waves of positive change that can transform the world?"